An airplane you have to inflate before flying? Yep, the Navy actually built one. I'm Bill, and this is Buffalo Air Park. Let's dive in. Ever heard of an airplane you had to inflate before flying? Sounds like a Saturday morning cartoon, right? But back in the 1950s, Goodyear, yep, the tire and blimp folks, actually built one. They called it the Inflatoplane. Now, the military was pretty excited about this idea. Picture it, a rescue plane small enough to pack into a 44 cubic foot container, toss it in a Jeep trailer, or even drop it by parachute behind enemy lines. The plan was that a downed pilot could literally pump up their escape plan and fly to safety. Genius or absolutely bonkers? You decide. Of course, Goodyear wasn't just slapping together pool floats. They came up with a special material called air mat, basically 2 layers of rubberized fabric held together by thousands of nylon threads. Inflate it, and those threads stretch tight like I-beams, making the structure surprisingly rigid and light. Pretty clever engineering. And that's where test pilot Dick Ulm enters the story. Ulm was the guy who debuted the Inflatoplane in 1956 and called it the most unusual plane I ever flew. Can't argue with him there. Your first glimpse in this Navy footage shows the deflated plane folded neatly on a little dolly, looking more like a camping tent than an airplane. Then comes the magic. A few minutes with an air hose, and it transforms into a working airplane. It only needed about 8 to 25 psi of pressure, less than the air in your car tires, low maintenance at least. Now, I've got to stop here and point out, as it inflates, Dick steadies that tiny Nelson engine so the prop doesn't tip over and puncture the fuselage. That's one way to ruin your day. Once it's full, he casually hand starts the prop, head practically next to the spinning blades, wearing nothing more than an open-faced helmet. Safety standards were definitely a little different in the 1950s. This model, the GA468, was amphibious. It had wheels for land, but could also be fitted with a hydroski to take off and land on water, which is what you see in this test footage at Wingfoot Lake in Ohio. Notice that vintage Goodyear aircraft logo on the fuselage. Nice touch. But those 2 little bungee cords up front, supposedly helping the ski trim itself? Yeah, I wouldn't put much faith in those. One floating stick on the water, and you're swimming home. Watch Ulm on takeoff. He's holding a lot of up elevator, and the wing has a steep angle of incidence compared to the fuselage. As an RC builder, that jumps right out at me. It looks extreme, but somehow he coaxes it into the air. From another angle, you can clearly see the high angle of incidence of the wing as he comes in for a landing. He makes it look easy, but I still have my doubts. At one point, Ulm climbs out and bounces on the wing like it's an inflatable raft. Impressive, sure, but one sharp object and poof. Now, when it was flying right, the Inflatoplane was surprisingly capable. Ulm called it a cushiony ride that smoothed out bumps on the ground. Top speed was around 72 miles per hour with a range of 390 miles. It could take off in just 250 feet and land in 350. Not bad for a rubber airplane that could fit in your car. But here's where reality sets in. In April 1959, Ulm himself had a close call when a wing collapsed mid-flight, forcing him to parachute to safety. Just 2 months later, Army Lieutenant Malcolm Wallace wasn't so lucky. His inflatoplane failed, and he was unable to get his parachute open in time. By the early 1970s, helicopters had proven to be a far more practical rescue tool, and the inflatoplane program was quietly canceled in '73. Only about a dozen were ever built, including a couple of two-seat versions. You can still see a few survivors today in museums like the Smithsonian, the Ohio History Connection, and the Stonehenge Air Museum. So in the end, the Goodyear inflatoplane was a bold experiment, part rescue craft, part pool toy, and all guts. Thanks to test pilots like Dick Ulm, we got to see what a rubber airplane could actually do, and I've got to admit, pretty wild, right?